Thank you for joining us today for our Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. My name is Maggie Montemuro, and I am the Marketing Coordinator at Savvy Ladies. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the chat window. Or if you are joining us by phone, you can email your question to info@savvyladies.org. Our presenter today is MP Dunleavey, award-winning personal finance writer, author, and editor. MP says she is most proud of her work involving women's relationship to money. Thank you for being here with us, MP, to help us learn about couples and money. And I'll now hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time out of your work day and your lunch break to join us. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Maggie, for inviting me. This is very exciting. In honor of Valentine's Day coming up this weekend and all the financial and emotional pressure of this completely manufactured holiday, I thought I'd offer a small but practical gift to couples everywhere. How to start understanding why you really fight about money. So the idea here is that I'd like to explore, not just the ordinary money fights that we have, but the kind of persistent, perpetual, annoying ones that we would all just like to get rid of. Before we begin, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. I am the Financial Content Director at Time Inc. Content Solutions. I'm currently in charge of developing a website for Charles Schwab, and you guys can go check that out. It's called Insights and Ideas. It's an awesome website. And some of you may know me from my days at Daily Worth, where I was the co-founder with Amanda Steinberg. And I'm also a personal finance columnist. I used to have a column for many years on MSN Money, as well as the New York Times. And I'm the author of Money Can Buy Happiness, which I hope will come into play in this webinar today. So let's dig in. Valentine's Day is kind of a special time of year for me and my husband, mainly because I'm always tempted to hand him a copy of the Sundance catalog with all my favorite items circled, particularly the jewelry items. But, the reality is that my husband and I share our finances. We pool our income. We have a shared checking, a joint checking, and joint savings. And so really, whatever he buys for me, I'm kind of buying for myself, So when I think of it like that, I'd actually rather save the money. But then I also want him to spend money on me on overpriced jewelry from the Sundance catalog. So that is the hallmark of many money fights and conflicts. They are illogical. They're often irrational. These points of disagreement or disappointment. I think disappointment is a really key ingredient in sparking many money fights. Is that we feel some sort of disappointment in our partner. And it's often very specific to your relationship. So somebody else looking in at me might think I was a lunatic for circling the jewelry items that I wanted from the Sundance catalog. Somebody else might totally understand. But I think it would be hard for anyone to predict why that would irritate my husband so much. But it does. But in any case, so in order to understand why your partner makes you crazy sometimes, I think it's going to help to look deeper into a couple of very common money myths, and the better to get at some of that irrationality and what is really going on for us at these moments. So myth number one, money fights are the main cause of divorce. Well, that's one that we've all heard, right? And there's some evidence that it's true, but it's kind of slim evidence actually, because there are really very many causes of divorce. But anyway, even if it were 100% true, how helpful is that little saying, money fights are the main cause of divorce? It doesn't actually distinguish between the different types of money squabbles that you and your mate might be having. And some are more toxic than others. And that's what we want to get to today. So there there are obviously many, many different ways to fight about money, but they can kind of be loosely broken out into two main categories. First, there's kind of what you might want to call event-based money fights. So let's say there's a crisis, a job loss, an illness, and it just throws you and your partner off your game. You know, suddenly you're dealing with a ton of bills or a bunch of insurance forms or, you know, something really kind of unexpected, and it causes a lot of tension and frustration, and you end up arguing. Sometimes it's even more ordinary than that. And we all know moments like this where, let's say, a certain somebody can't find his W-2s at tax time, or you might forget to pick up cash to pay the babysitter, somebody has to go to the ATM, and it's annoying, right? Now, in a way, these event-based squabbles, these really are money fights because it's about a financial issue, and typically there's not a lot of subtext there, right? On the other hand, you have the repetitive spiral of doom, as I like to call it. These are the non-money fights that are more pattern-based. Okay, these are the repetitive themes that you can't leave alone. And those of you who are in relationships right now, I know you know what I'm talking about. It's the itch you always end up scratching, the fire that you can start in a hot second. And these money fights, strangely enough, though, often start off as something seemingly logical, seemingly rational, and they often have a reason. You know, well, why didn't you send in that invoice? Or, we can't really afford that car or that vacation, are you kidding me? Or something a little bit more personal like, you know, did you really loan that guy money again? Or your brother or your sister, did you loan her money again? So there's like a reason behind it, right? There's some sort of like a rational catalyst for what sparks the money fight. But the thing is that reason, however justified, is typically just a cover-up for something that you can't put into words, a deeper feeling or a deeper source of conflict. So often you fight the fight instead of having the talk. And that's why these non-money fights can be so toxic, because until you stop and try to communicate what's really bugging you, it really does erode your relationship. So I hope that kind of makes sense to everybody. You know, this idea that on the one hand, you've got money fights that are really about money. Those are the kind of squabbles that are not going to end your relationship, right? It's the conflicts where you are trying to communicate something without really communicating it. You're not really communicating the real need or the real emotion. You're fighting about circumstances that happen to be financial in nature. Those are the things that can really undermine intimacy and cause ongoing friction. So I can't really tell you what the issue might be in your specific relationship. Everybody's a little bit different. But I think we can look to another myth for some clues. This is myth number 2. Savers always marry spenders. And I kind of hate this one because it's become such a cliche, but it does have some truth to it. When it comes to money, we often pick our financial opposites to fall in love with. Savers often do marry spenders, and vice versa. But again, this only tells a fragment of a really interesting story raised with different assumptions about money. And those ideas are so ingrained, they can be really, really hard to see for you and for your partner, right? They just seem like the way life is, like the sky is blue and you always tip 20%. You don't even think about your internal rules, the rules that you're living by, until your mate, who's walking around with a completely different set of rules, and he only tips 20%, 10%, until he wanders into your life, and then everything kind of gets messed up, right? So what can we do with that? Well, I think it's really interesting to examine what do we mean when we say financial opposites attract. Again, these myths need to be teased apart for us to get anything out of them, right? So spenders maybe typically marry savers, but there's more nuance to it than that, right? So what I've often seen is that you have steady spenders are married to sudden splurgers. So for example, that's kind of the dynamic in my relationship. I'm not like a huge shopper, but you know, I spend on stuff pretty steadily throughout the year. But my husband's more the type to suddenly kind of like, you know, I don't know, bam, I come home, there's some package from Amazon. You know, it's that kind of thing. Then you have planners and avoiders. That's another way that financial opposites often attract. There's usually somebody in the relationship who's more the planner, and then there's somebody who thinks plan is a 4-letter word, right? Another dynamic I think that's important to pay attention to, and this is something that came out in a conversation recently with a friend, is which partner feels rich and which partner feels poor. It's a very interesting dynamic, and it completely skews the way you might approach your life or the decisions that you are supposed to be making together. If you're both trying to make the same decision, let's just take the car example. Should we buy a car? Or, you know, should we buy a new sofa? Or should we take a vacation? Some fairly substantial investment. You know, rich me is going to react very differently to that decision making than poor me, whoever occupies those roles in the relationship. And then you have time savers and time spenders. This one I feel like does not get enough airtime. So here's a little quick pop quiz. Would you rather spend money to save time, or would you rather spend the time to do something and save the money? So a classic example in New York, you guys are apartment dwellers as I am, is the laundry, right? Should you send the laundry out, or should you do the laundry in the basement? So now, if you're a busy couple, as my husband and I are, and we have a son, my feeling typically is I'm perfectly willing to do the laundry if it's a low-key week. I actually like doing laundry. It's not a problem, right? But there are certain moments where there are certain weeks where it is just so crazy. It's like, really? You want me to spend 2 hours doing laundry? I don't think so. I would so much rather spend $30, right? My husband thinks this is insane. He thinks that spending an extra, it amounts to about an extra $10 to $15 to send the laundry out. He thinks that's absolutely ludicrous. And I'm sure some of you right now would agree with him. Or maybe some of you are siding with me. But you know what I mean? The emotions can be very strong. Like, why would you spend that extra money to send the laundry out? But on the other side, someone could be equally dumbfounded. Why wouldn't you send the laundry out? It's only an extra $10 or $15, right? So there's many different frameworks here and many different perspectives that can come to bear. It's really important to try to dig into where are you coming from when you and your spouse are hitting those roadblocks together. So the last myth is something, it's kind of a silent myth in a way. It's somewhat under the radar. I don't think a lot of people walk around saying this one the same way people say, oh, savers marry spenders. But I think there's kind of a myth among couples. It's like, well, money fights shouldn't happen, or why are we arguing about this? Or, surely there must be an easy solution. But, I really want you to look at this diagram because this really sums it up to me. It's like, we all have our beliefs and our priorities, right? Plus we have our backgrounds and, the different ways that we were raised. If you look at the actual place where you overlap, that part in the middle where you agree, that's where the money fights don't happen. But if you look, there's a lot more opportunity for money fights to happen. So we have to bear that in mind. So what I would like to leave you all with is that it is really the most important thing, right, is to try to change the fight into a conversation. And that's what we've been doing here, is we've been pulling apart what are the myths, what are the thoughts, what are the feelings around money, and giving them a little bit more heft, a little bit more weight. It's not about why did you do that or why didn't you? There's a conversation that can happen, right? Because you're pretty much always going to disagree on something, but by focusing on that part, I'm gonna back up here. So the part in the middle here where you agree, that's a really important part of your relationship, and it's a really important part of your financial life. And where you agree, even if it's just something small, like you both agree that, the kids need to go to a different camp this year, or you both agree that you need a much better budget, or you both agree you need to pay off that last credit card, whatever it is that you agree on, that can become an anchor. And it can also become a positive place to start the conversation. And it can also be a way to end up a little bit happier, I think, because one of the things that a friend of mine said to me, I don't know, this is one of those sayings that's out there, but I don't know where it comes from, but it's like, it really does boil down to, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I think when it comes to money, it's happiness that leads to both emotional success and financial success. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, MP. That was really great, really helpful and informative. I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can still submit them now through the chat or email. And we had some questions that came in. The first one is, I would rather spend time to save money, but my husband would rather spend money to save time. Who wins when it comes to joint decisions we have to make together?
Thanks for picking the tricky one that is the biggest fight in my relationship. No, it's actually not. We actually have a bigger money fight than that, because we all have our spiral of doom, right? So that's a really good question. How do you find that common ground? The way, I'm not saying that this recipe is right for everybody, but I do think that trying to agree on some kind of a compromise for the time, particularly with the time versus money thing, is workable. Like, most people will concede, okay, tonight it's too crazy, we're ordering pizza. You know what I mean? Like, most people will concede something at some point. And I think for me, a lot of times, I hate to admit this, but for me, a lot of times it's allowing myself to be the wrong sort of, quote, I'm using quote marks now with my fingers in the air, like, I'm the wrong one. Like, you're right, honey, let's just do the laundry and it'll only cost $12. And that makes him so happy. So I hope that helps.
Okay, great. Our next question is, do you think separate bank accounts are wise for couples?
Oh, yeah. Well, I do. I don't think it's wise for every couple, but I think that in certain circumstances where you and your spouse just feel more comfortable managing your money separately, it can really be a boon. It can be extremely helpful. It can help you avoid money fights. I have seen it work time and time again. My husband and I have even talked about doing that because, we've looked at it like, is that a solution so that we don't scrap and squabble about this, that, and the other thing? I will say that if you now have let's say you have a joint account right now, but you're thinking of separating it, it's very emotional to do that. So if you do decide to separate your accounts, going from a joint to a separate situation, just do it carefully, mindfully, not in an angry way, because it can feel a little bit like a divorce because you're splitting your assets. So that would be my one piece of advice on that one.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, my partner and I have very different dreams for our future and retirement. We don't fight too much about it now, but I'm worried it will cause issues for us later on. Do you have any tips on how to avoid problems?
That is an excellent, excellent, excellent question. And that one is so much more of a dialogue. I wish we could have a little bit more of a chit chat about that, because it would help to know a little bit more of the details of the situation. But I guess given our webinar format and me not knowing your personal situation, that well at all, not knowing your situation at all, I guess what I would say is that is maybe in this case, if you've got your Venn diagram of the two overlapping circles, maybe in this case, what is overlapping, where you do agree, is perhaps on, let's say, how much money to save each month, right? So maybe you have a different vision for what your retirement ultimately might look like, but you both agree you want to retire and you want to save for it. Well, let me tell you, that's actually big, okay? It may not feel like a big deal, like you may be more concerned that he wants to go rock climbing, you know, or that's his vision is kind of like a very active retirement, and yours is kind of more, you know, you're envisioning being with your grandkids, or vice versa, right? So, and ideally, like, I'm going to take a stab and assume that you're maybe a few, you know, some years away from retirement. I think that it's more important to focus on the thing that you do agree about here, which is that you're saving for that time of life together. And then you can begin to work on the fact that you're going to need to find some commonalities. And also here, I'm going to be a little radical, but you know, I am also thinking that by the time couples get to the retirement age, I don't think it's going to look like our grandmas and grandpas. You know what I mean? It's not going to look like two people sitting on a porch or in the RV. I think we're going to see people doing more separate things, actually. And maybe it's okay to build that into the plan.
We had another question just come in that's kind of related to this last one. I am saving for retirement and believe I am on track, while my husband is not saving at all. Do you have any tips in that case?
Kill him. No. Oh, man, he's not saving at all. Again, it's one of those things where I wish I knew some details. Like, is he not saving just because he's like that kind of guy, doesn't like to plan kind of thing? Or is he not saving just because at the moment he's in a job where they don't offer him a 401k and it's a little bit harder for him to save? A couple of different scenarios. One is that, you know, if you love him and care about him and it's looking like it's, you know, you guys are sort of good to go for a couple of decades, there's a thing called a spousal IRA. Let's say your spouse does not have access to an IRA or, does not have access to a 401k at his job, right? Or maybe he's working part-time right now or something like that. You can open up an IRA and fund it for your spouse. So that's a possibility. And then, but on the emotional side, like, how do you convince your partner to save? You know, again, I think without turning it into a fight, but making it a conversation about, you know, I see us being together. I see us living this life together. You know, maybe we could start small, or, you know, and then the other thing is, I don't think it has to be all on you or all on your partner. Maybe you can invite a financial planner, like an hourly financial planner, into the mix. There are people who will help you make a financial plan. Sometimes it helps to have an intermediary who can encourage or kind of get somebody over that first hurdle. I mean, I know with my husband, I had to just go ahead and open up a Roth IRA for him. Boom, done. It happens.
Okay. And we have another question. Do most people learn their money habits from their parents? And can you maybe talk a little bit more about how we get our money selves or identities?
Wow, well, that's a whole other webinar, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think we get our money habits from our parents and from our environment, you might say. Parents is kind of hard because are you emulating your parents, or do some of your money habits come in response or in reaction or in rebellion to your parents? I do think our families are the culture, the financial culture of the family maybe is a good way to look at it. So even if it's not your folks exactly, it could be the people who you saw in your family and you had a financial you know, affinity with them, or they were a big influence on you in some way. So yeah, I really think that that's crucial to take a look at. And I think it does enormously inform and shape who we become as people financially. But I also think it's important when we have conversations with people, anybody, your partner, but, friends too, is to remember that the idea that we have financial selves, that selfish, that financial self is shaped by early formative years and experiences, that's still kind of new, and people don't always talk about it, but it's a nice thing to bring into a conversation is, where do you think you got that idea about, that it's okay not to pay your parking tickets? You know what I mean? Like, they're just funny assumptions about life that we bring into our money lives. And sometimes they're very, very unconscious. As I was saying before, we walk around with an internal set of rules. And it's as simple as like, the sky is blue, you tip 20%. And a lot of us have just these basic, like, this is what you do and this is how you do it. And I think looking at the key players in your life, I think a lot of my financial life is in reaction to my parents. But I also think I was influenced by my aunts and uncles. I grew up in New York City. Most of my aunts and uncles kind of lived out in the suburbs. I don't want to get into my whole, financial situation, but, it's just interesting to me what I admired as a child and what I still admire today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, MP. Thank you for taking the time to answer all these questions. We want to thank everyone for joining us today and submitting your questions. We hope you'll join us again next week. And thank you again so much for your time today.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Thanks, MP.